the Sirens. Such was the warning given by the goddess Circe to the brave Odysseus before embarking on his perilous odyssey back home. And unlike many before them, brave Odysseus and his loyal men were spared, for they had the good sense of heeding Circe's warning. But many were not met with the same good fortune, for unlike Odysseus, they were caught unawares, enchanted by the Sirens' irresistible song, luring them into their doom. In a previous video I made called The Flame, I talked about the perilous patterns of human nature and the tale of the unsuspecting man being beguiled by a beautiful and enchanting woman is probably the most cliche pattern of human behavior in the history of humanity. And despite choosing to call this video The Siren, I was originally going to call it The Succubus. But seeing as the definition has very sinister undertones of sleeping men getting sexually assaulted by female demons, I thought it best not to go there, especially since I know of a man who has been violated in that way in his sleep by a woman on more than one occasion. So we'll just stick with sirens. Now, I've spoken about a few problematic women on this channel before, chief amongst them being Amber Heard, Meghan Markle, and to some extent even Elizabeth Holmes. But a lot of you have nominated Jada Pinkett Smith in the comment section of my anti-feminist handbook video, which was the entire inspiration for this video, so thank you for nominating her, because it made me realize how 3 different men in different relationships with different women were pretty much walking along the same path. And that fascinated me. It's no secret that of the 2, Jada and Will Smith is the megastar. In fact, by the time Will Smith divorced his first wife in 1995 and started to actively pursue Jada, she had already quit Hollywood because it just wasn't working for her and had moved back to Baltimore until Will convinced her to move back to LA to be with him. And by the way, I'm not gonna get into their whole How I Met Your Mother origin story. I'm just setting the scene with the relevant parts. So, aside from this success imbalance that always existed within this couple, 2 incidents stand out to me. One of them being the infamous cheating scandal, which we will get to soon. But before that, I believe one of the most telling red table talks, which gives us an insight into the dynamics of Will Smith and Jada, is the story of Jada's 40th birthday party.
Her 40th birthday was gonna be my thing.
It was gonna be a splash.
It was gonna be a splash. It was gonna be the thing that lifted her out of this midlife crisis, and it was gonna be my deepest, most beautiful proclamation of love.
Or so he thought.
And the whole time I'm like, the little boy that wants mommy to say everything was wonderful, right?
Until Jada managed to convince him that...
She's told me that the party was the most ridiculous display of my ego. And to this day, I know I was crushed because it was true.
Yeah.
It wasn't a party for her.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to watch. Then, of course, there is that red table talk, where Jada basically sits there opposite her husband and excuses her disgusting behavior. Cheating on your husband with your son's friend. I mean, it really doesn't get much lower than that.
I think you need to say clearly what happened.
As far as what?
You and I decided we were going to take our space, and what happened?
Yeah, and then I got into an entanglement with August. That's what I said.
An entanglement?
Yes. Yes.
A relationship?
Yes, it was a relationship, absolutely. I actually don't look at it as a transgression at all.
See, that's the problem with these toxic feminazi types. They seem to believe that taking the worst part of men, promotes feminism and equality. And I believe that what we're seeing here with this talk is the ultimate example of that.
One thing I want to get clear about and clean up, one of the things that was kind of swirling in the press about you giving permission, which is, you know, the only person that can give permission in that particular circumstance is myself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
With her demeanor and her arrogance and her lack of remorse, the message I'm getting is that she feels as though she's just as entitled as any other man to have a midlife crisis and cheat on their spouse of, 20, 30 plus years with someone 20, 30 plus years younger than them. Because isn't that what men have been doing for centuries? That's not exactly the type of equality that we're meant to be angling for. It reminds me of Meghan with her bullying and people calling her a girl boss, and that's just, how girl bosses do. Or worse, Amber Heard harming Johnny because supposedly men do it, so why not women too? I thought feminism was meant to be progressive rather than regressive. And the dead look behind Will Smith's eyes as she lectured him on how she doesn't regret a thing, and the deep healing that this affair led her to, I bet it was deep, giggity.
And I was really able to do some really deep healing.
That was just KO. She annihilated what little life, what little light was left inside of him. And she did it before our very eyes. So it's bad enough she was excusing her repulsive behavior, but then she did it in public for the entire world to witness. Shouldn't you just have kept this conversation private? I don't know why her husband agreed to do this. Again, it reminds me of a certain couple who decided to make a living and make hundreds of millions of dollars by airing their own dirty laundry. Speaking of privacy, there was that horrible video that Jada herself filmed and uploaded in her home where she catches Will Smith clearly off guard, and despite his clear discomfort and despite him verbalizing that he wasn't interested, she still continued to shove the camera in his face and uploaded his discomfort for the entire world to see. And to me, that again just, reads power play. I'm the boss. This is my version of feminism. I step all over you. I don't care about your boundaries and your comfort. If a man did this to his wife, if you swap the roles and he uploaded it anyway, somehow I don't think the world would just sweep this one under the rug. So by the time we get to the infamous Oscar punch, Will was just not Will anymore. Rather than revel in the glory of winning an Oscar, Will Smith ruined his legacy instead and solidified himself as an unhinged, abusive person. All supposedly in the name of his wife's honor. Although, what honor an admitted cheater who then gloats about it to her husband has, I can't tell you. Now, he is a grown adult, and I've said this before in a much older video. I'm not absolving him of his role in this. He is entirely responsible for his actions. I acknowledge that. But one must still look at things in context rather than just as an isolated incident. It's how things work in a court of law. You paint a picture for the fact finder to understand what motivated or drove a person to behave in a certain way. A classic example of this is when you introduce evidence of domestic violence, if a spouse murdered their partner, and if this evidence is found to be cogent enough, then the charge can be reduced down to manslaughter. Even though the incident itself hasn't changed, but the context surrounding it provides insight and can be used as a mitigating factor. So the question is, has Jada's treatment of her husband and her clear devaluation of him as a man driven him to snap? He says in his acceptance speech later that
love will make you do crazy things.
So would it really be amiss to conclude that his feelings for Jada, as twisted and complicated as they must be, drove him to lash out on her behalf, to prove himself to her as worthy of her love?
Will Smith is a character,
Yep.
right? But deep down inside, I was an insecure little boy that wanted Jada to say I was great, right? And if she didn't say I was great, the dragon came out.
Yeah.
Some people even claim that Jada wanted to ruin Will's big night because she was jealous that she wasn't the one getting the Oscar. And while this can't be factually proven, this is an insecurity which she has skirted around in Red Table Talks.
Jada's an actress, but she had 2 babies and she had to be home to raise her babies while I got to do everything I wanted to do. She was sacrificing herself to fit my picture.
Right.
Personally, I just go back to the fact that she had all but quit Hollywood in the mid-90s and moved back home. So what was her excuse back then? She was single, she was beautiful, she didn't have children, and she still didn't make it. It looks like to me that she is just vastly insecure and even resentful about her husband's success, because it's a level of success that she has never been able to attain by herself, not before him and not with him. But just like Meghan and Amber, rather than acknowledge these insecurities and maybe just work on them, work on improving yourself and your self-image and your self-esteem, she projects them onto her husband and potentially even her children by blaming them for her own shortcomings and lack of success, rather than simply admitting that Will Smith was the meal ticket that put her on the map in the first place. I mean, if you want proof, she got her breakout role in The Nutty Professor in 1996. She started dating Will Smith in 1995. So, you do the math. For those very familiar with Meghan and Harry and Amber and Johnny, I believe that you can see the parallels that exist between these 3 couples are uncanny. You see, like Will Smith, Johnny Depp and Prince Harry were both effectively at the top of their game before they met their wives. They were both very well liked, they appeared to be in very good spirits, and were seemingly mentally and physically well after spending, a few turbulent years fighting their own demons. Likewise, all 3 men were vastly successful and wealthy in their own right. And all 3 men fell for women who were virtually unknown and nowhere near their own level of success at the time of their meeting. All 3 men were as happy as Larry with their new Sirens wrapped around their arms. And at least in Harry's case, he had his own version of the goddess Circe in the form of his family and friends who warned him, slow down, get to know her, no need to rush. But unlike Odysseus, who had his wits about him, Harry chose to ignore these warnings and was lured in by the beautiful Sirens song, leading him straight to his demise. And then finally, we watched in real time how these 3 men, once full of light and vigor, gradually lose their spark, all while their wives were almost feeding off that energy. And what gets me is these women just operate with such confidence and entitlement, as though they were absolutely beyond reproach. And that's because they truly believe that they are, based on what society has taught us, which is that women can do no wrong, especially when it comes to areas where traditionally men are the perpetrators and women are their victims, such as, abusive relationships. And I'm not talking necessarily physical abuse, I'm talking psychological abuse as well. But imagine the audacity of a man sitting his wife down on his own show, filming it for the entire world to witness as he sits there smirking and informs her of how his cheating on her was one of the best things that could have happened to him, that he regrets nothing, and that I just wanted to feel good. Now imagine a man abusing his wife for years, maiming her, isolating her from her loved ones, her friends and family, bullying his staff to the point of tears. Would the world be chanting boy power or that's a boy boss for ya? Somehow I don't think so. But the lengths that people will go to excuse female behavior and blame the man instead, despite the fact that he may actually be her victim in that instance, is mind-boggling to me. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen a male victim of years of stalking and harassment and assault be told that it's just not as serious. It's not that serious because it's a woman doing it to you. I've seen male victims getting laughed at and ridiculed by their own friends, their own supposed friends, because they finally decided to take a stance and say no to the abuse. You know, I know it's a work of fiction, duh, but the reason that Odysseus and his men were able to survive the lure of the Sirens is because they recognized their vulnerability. There was none of that bravado, you know, that chest thumping, oh, I'm a man, no woman can take me. Had they done that, the Odyssey would have been a much shorter book, I'll tell you that. Basically, the TLDR version. Men and women can both be jerks. Just some food for thought. Thank you, bye. I'm gonna fall.